Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's Clean Energy Speaker Series, where we have a great program lined up to discuss solar project development in the Southeast. I'm Ben Hill with Georgia Tech's ATDC, Technology Development Center, and I'd like to welcome you to this ongoing series on clean energy solutions in the Southeast. Seems a little loud. Today's program is a follow-on program to the April 28th program, where we looked at solar resources in the Southeast. We considered the solar radiation footprint for the Southeast, economics, and then the viability of different technologies. Today's program looks at how one gets solar deployed into the user base, and it looks at the business proposition and further examines the economics and just the realities of getting solar out in use. Couple of business announcements, and then we'll move into our program. First is I'd like to mention our website, the secleanenergy.org website, which is where you can find today's presentations and the archived version of the webcast, as well as previous presentations and webcasts for your use on your own time, at your leisure. Second is we will take a break for the summer, and the Clean Energy Speaker Series will kick off again the last Wednesday of August. And so for those of you who haven't registered previously, send an email or go to the secleanenergy.org website and sign up for the mailing list so you can make sure you get upcoming program announcements when we reconvene in August. A couple of other things is there are a number of parties who make this whole series possible. And there is an excellent board of advisors who contribute their time and energy to this program series. There are a number of parties from Sutherland Asbell, who's the principal sponsor, who will introduce our speakers. Dorothy Franzoni will introduce our speakers. There are a number of groups at Georgia Tech who provide support, and I'd like to thank them for their ongoing support. Also, I'd like to recognize and thank the support of Southface Institute and the Georgia Solar Energy Association for their collaboration on this part of the series. For those of you who are participating over the web, and we have quite a few on the webcast today, should you have questions, email your questions to me, and I will pass those on to our speakers. And for those of you on the web, my email address is ben.hill@georgiatech.edu, ben.hill, Hill, @gatech.edu. And once again, let me just remind you of our program, upcoming program, which will be in August. So we'll take off the next 3 months and look forward to seeing you at the end of August. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dorothy Franzoni, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Ben. I am Dorothy Franzoni. I'm a partner at Sutherland, Asbell & Brennan here in Atlanta. And I, along with Tom Warren, who is also here today with us, we are the co-chairs of Sutherland's renewable energy practice. Sutherland, Asbell & Brennan has offices in a number of cities around the country, and we have a very large and broad energy practice covering the gamut of all energy sources, and a large practice in the electric industry, and a large focus at this point on renewable energy and climate change issues. And we're very proud to be a sponsor of this speaker series with Georgia Tech and with the other sponsors who have joined us. So it's my pleasure today to introduce to you our 3 speakers. The first speaker is Amy Heinemann. She's going to talk about some public policy issues. She is currently a policy analyst at the North Carolina Solar Center. Her work has included researching state, local, and utility incentives and policies for a database I bet you all are aware of. It's the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency. I had to read that because I call it the Desire website. It's a terrific website, so thank you, Amy. It's fantastic. She focuses on policies in the Southeast and the Pacific Northwest and manages the Desire Solar and the Desire Quantitative Database. Her research interests have focused on renewable energy development, climate change policy, industrial ecology, and corporate sustainability. And since we're here in an academic environment, I'm also going to tell you about everybody's academic credentials, which are quite substantial. Amy has a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from George Washington University and a Master of Environmental Management from Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. Again, thank you, Amy, and welcome. Our next speaker is going to focus more on commercial and residential issues in the solar industry, and he is Michael Shore, the CEO of FLS Energy. FLS Energy, I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more, but I'll give you a brief introduction. They have developed, designed, installed, and financed some of the most important solar energy projects in the Southeast. Michael's company has grown from 3 employees in 2006 to over 50 employees today. He's written extensively on sustainability issues and has served on the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency Leadership Group and North Carolina's Global Climate Change Commission. Michael has a master's in civil engineering from North Carolina State University, and then he went next door and got a second master's in environmental policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Thank you, Michael, and welcome to the speaker series. Finally, our last speaker will be talking about utility scale use of solar energy. Her name is Kerinia Cusick, and she comes to us as Director of Government Affairs from SunEdison. Her background is in energy policy and renewable energy financial analysis, and she works to develop solar-friendly policies in states east of the Mississippi. That's quite a challenge. But thank you. It's much needed. In this role, she primarily supports legislators, regulators, and energy offices focusing on creating solar markets in their states. She joined SunEdison from Think Energy, a renewable energy consulting firm. In that role, she worked with clients to evaluate the financial benefit of renewable energy technologies and did preliminary design of statewide renewable energy portfolios. Kerinia holds a Master in Science in Systems Management from the University of Southern California and a BS in Mechanical Engineering from Drexel University. Welcome, Kerinia, and thank you for coming. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy to start us off today.
So good afternoon, everybody. As was mentioned, I work for the Desire Project. If you're not familiar with us, I would certainly encourage you to check it out. This is just kind of an overview of what the Desire Project is, and on the left-hand side, a screenshot of the Desire website. We track federal, state, utility, and local government incentives for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and we also have a solar-specific component of our website. And this includes a solar policy guide that's designed for policymakers, and it kind of gives a good overview, a high-level overview of different state incentive programs and policy types, and then gives best practices. Before I get started on the policy side of things, I just wanted to throw this up here. I know that a lot of times people question the photovoltaic or the solar resource in the Southeast, and this is just kind of showing what the solar resource is in the Southeast and comparing it, and the U.S. as a whole, and comparing it to Germany. Germany currently has the most installed PV capacity in the world. They've got over 9,000 megawatts installed. And the U.S. actually has shy of 3,000 megawatts. So I think that this shows that with the right combination of policies and incentives, you can really have significant solar development. I'm not going to list all of these. This is just kind of for reference, but these are the typical suite of solar policy options. I'm going to focus on state renewable portfolio standards, on net metering and interconnection standards, and then on direct cash incentives, which include rebate programs, production incentives, grant programs, and I'm also going to talk about state tax incentives. So at Desire, we really like maps, and so we put practically everything in map format, so you're going to see a lot of maps in my presentation, so bear with me. I think that one of the really useful things about having maps is that you can analyze regional trends, and so I think you're going to see a lot of kind of white space where the Southeast is, and I think that that indicates a potential for future development. So the policies I'm talking about aren't always present in the Southeast, but there's definitely potential for that, and we have the solar resource, so these policies are things to keep in mind. This is a map of direct cash incentives, and so, as I mentioned before, it'll include grant programs, rebate programs, production incentives. North Carolina actually has, North Carolina should not be on this map because the grant program is directed at businesses, but there are a few different incentives throughout the Southeast. Tennessee actually has a really strong program, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in reference to federal incentive programs. I guess I should back up a bit and mention that direct cash incentives and tax credits are kind of the bread and butter of state solar policy. So the Solar Alliance, which is an organization that works in the field, talks about there being 4 pillars for state solar policy, and to have a robust solar market, you need to have incentives, you need to have good utility rate and revenue policies, and you need to have good net metering and interconnection. And so I'll kind of hit on all of those things with the exception of rate and revenue policies. So with that said, direct cash incentives can be a really important component of state solar policy. In Georgia, there's actually a state rebate program that's funded by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So in the past year and a half, there's been a lot of money put in into state level programs by the federal government. And so that's one of the things that's present in Georgia. Tennessee used a lot of money and put it into their state energy program specifically for solar. So they're one of the states to look out for in the future. In terms of state tax credits, these are something that are really being more utilized in the Southeast. Louisiana, I'll just point out, they only have a tax credit for residential projects, but it's a phenomenal tax credit. It's a really unique example of a tax credit that isn't really found elsewhere in the United States. They have a tax credit that's worth 50% of the cost of a solar system, up to $12,500, and that amount can be refunded. So it's really unique in the sense that if you get a solar system in Louisiana, the first $2,500 of the solar system you can get a 50% tax credit for, and then get a check cut if you don't have that tax liability. Renewable portfolio standards are, I think, really one of the major drivers of renewable energy development, and they're something that really are on the regulatory side of things. So tax credits and state production incentives, rebates, and other direct cash incentives are on the financial side of things, and so those are things that are going to affect your bottom line. They're going to reduce the cost of a system. But renewable portfolio standards and the net metering and interconnection are things that are going to provide incentives for utilities to have good policies for renewable energy development. In the Southeast, North Carolina is the only state that has a renewable portfolio standard. If you see Virginia highlighted there, they have a renewable portfolio goal. So it's not actually a mandatory requirement. But North Carolina, just to kind of describe what a renewable portfolio standard is, a utility has to, in North Carolina, for example, get 12.5% of its electricity from renewable generation by 2021. This is just kind of a historical perspective. So this is a policy that has been used a lot more recently. And this is what it looked like in 1997. So just to go back one slide. Now 29 states and DC have a renewable portfolio standard, and 6 states have goals. And in 1997, 5 states had renewable portfolio standards, and 6 with Massachusetts under development. Within a renewable portfolio standard, having a solar or distributed generation carve-out is really important. North Carolina has a solar carve-out, and it's a really small amount. It's just 0.2% of overall electric generation that needs to come from solar by 2018. But this, as I'll show in a few later slides, can really impact solar development a lot. When North Carolina's renewable portfolio standard was passed in 2007, they had 0.4 megawatts of solar installed. By the end of 2008, they had 4.7 megawatts of solar installed, and then, as you can see from this, by 2025, to meet the solar carve-out in the renewable portfolio standard, they'll need 236 megawatts. So I think that shows how much of a driver a renewable portfolio standard and a solar carve-out can be in creating a state solar market. Of course, the policies that are in relation to a utility's interaction and a customer's interaction with the utility and renewable energy development are really important. So net metering and interconnection are things that aren't really focused on as much, but they're really important policies. How many people here are familiar with net metering policies? Okay, great. So I won't spend much time on them. Basically what net metering is it's a way for a customer to store electricity that's generated on the grid. So if you generate in excess of what you consume, then you basically won't have to pay for kilowatt hours to the utility, and you'll be able to roll over in most states whatever excess electricity you generate to the next month. So it's basically like the meter spinning backwards. On the right-hand side, there's a list from Freeing the Grid, which is a publication that comes out every year that ranks state-by-state net metering and interconnection policies. I brought a few copies with me, and I don't really want to take them back to North Carolina, so feel free to help yourself. But you can compare state-by-state net metering and interconnection policies. And I think it's really helpful just to get this exercise done because you can see what the areas are for improvement. So just to point out some net metering and interconnection policies, or some net metering policies that are exemplary in the Southeast. Florida actually improved their net metering in the past year, and they now have an A in Freeing the Grid. And so their model guidelines and ordinances and things like that the Interstate Renewable Energy Council comes out with, and they're also in Freeing the Grid, so I'd encourage you to check it out. This is a map of what state-by-state net metering looks like across the U.S., and most states have net metering policies, but as is shown in Freeing the Grid, all policies are not created equal. So while you see that there are states in the Southeast that have net metering policies, I'll just point out Georgia, I believe, has an F in net metering, so it makes it really difficult for people to connect to the grid if you don't have solid policies in place that make it easy and affordable. It doesn't really allow it to make it economical for some customers. South Carolina also doesn't really have great net metering. It's listed as having a voluntary utility program because all the utilities have different rules for net metering. But Florida down there has really great net metering, so it's an example to look to in the Southeast. So briefly on interconnection standards, these are just what are required to connect to the grid. So they're the technical issues related to the National Electric Code and just general safety standards. But interconnection standards are one of the things that can kind of hang people up when they're trying to connect to the grid because there can often be really high fees associated with interconnection. And a lot of times the fees are not based on the size of your system or the complexity of your system. They're just kind of a flat fee. So this could add potentially up to $1,000 to a residential installation. So this is something that really needs to be addressed. And Freeing the Grid also talks about this. Virginia actually isn't on this list, but Virginia passed really great interconnection standards this past year, and they now have an A in interconnection. So this is just the map of interconnection standards, and if you notice from net metering before, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama don't have net metering or interconnection standards, so this is definitely an area of weakness in the Southeast. I'll just touch briefly on federal incentives. I think that this table to the right is one of the really interesting things to look at. One of my coworkers did an analysis of how states are spending stimulus money and if they're spending stimulus money on solar specifically. And so you see here, one of the reasons that I mentioned that Tennessee is going to have a really robust solar market and a solar market that's developing rapidly is because they put $61.5 million that they got from ARA towards solar specifically. So over the next few years, they're going to be putting that money into the marketplace and funding things like rebate programs. Currently, they have a rebate program that is worth 40% of the cost of a system, and it's up to $75,000. So this can be a really significant incentive for people developing solar in Tennessee. And you just kind of see a rundown here of different states that put federal money into their solar programs to encourage development. Florida's actually kind of an interesting case. They have historically had a rebate program, but one of the problems with program design is that you can have really a start and stop cycle, and that doesn't encourage development because people can't rely on consistent funding. And so Florida's one of the examples that's done this. They had a really generous rebate. They offered $4 per watt up to $20,000 for residential customers, and these rebates just got snapped up really quickly. And so they used ARA money in the past year to fund some of the backlog of rebates, and they used $14.4 million to do that. So it's clearly a program that was really popular and had a lot of demand, and so I think that that's kind of just highlighting on how program design can really make a big difference. You don't want to have overly generous rebates that people who get love, but people who don't get can't really do anything, and they can't rely on that money. Just some federal incentives. These are things that, regardless of what your state has, you can take advantage of. These are actually the business incentives, and so there's the U.S. Department of Treasury Renewable Energy Grants and the Business Energy Investment Tax Credit, and these are both basically the same thing. Only the renewable energy grants allow you to get cash in lieu of the tax credit, so if you don't have the tax liability, you're able to take advantage of that, and that's kind of a limited time offer. And both of those are worth 30% of the cost of a system with no cap. So all the things I've talked about are kind of things that allow solar markets to develop, and if I flipped back through all the slides, you would see that pretty much all these states, California, New Jersey, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, New York, they all have a lot of these policies that I highlighted as being important in place, and they all have a lot of installed capacity. And at the end of 2008, this was the top 10 list of states that had the most installed capacity in the US, and California is really the giant here. And they're the giant for a reason. They have an initiative right now that puts $3.3 billion, I believe over 10 years, into solar programs across the state. And so there are things like this, also having good regulatory policies that allow you to really have a robust market. At the end of 2008, no states in the Southeast were on this list, but at the end of 2009, Florida and North Carolina both jumped onto this list. And I think the next speakers will talk about probably some of the things in North Carolina that enabled North Carolina to get onto the list. But certainly, their renewable portfolio standard is one of the big contributing factors. So I'm also going to talk about just one interesting emerging trend, PACE financing. And so this is not an incentive that allows you to take anything off the top of your installed costs, but it's something that allows people who don't have access to the traditional methods of financing to take advantage and be able to install solar systems. So PACE financing is a really horrible acronym that isn't clear even when I say what it stands for. It stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. And this is basically a complicated way of saying that you're able to take a loan from a local government and then pay for renewable energy or energy efficiency improvements on your property tax bill. So it's something that has to be authorized at the state level, and then it can be repaid on whatever local assessment on a property tax bill, water, sewer, utility bill. One of the benefits of this is that the loan transfers with the property, and so a lot of people don't plan on being in their home or whatever building they're occupying for more than 7 years, or that's what they think. That's how long they think they're going to be in their home, and so you don't have to worry about that if you do this because it'll transfer with the property and you're not responsible for it once you've sold the property. Only people that opt in and choose to participate in this will have this special assessment, so everybody in a city that has this program isn't going to have to pay for other people's solar systems, and then it's secured by a lien on the property. One important thing to note is that while it's a local government program, the state has to authorize this. So this is just a map showing what states authorize this. And it's a policy that really sprung up since 2008. So in the past 2 years, this is when this policy has started being used. Did they? Well, they did. They passed legislation, but has the governor signed it? Okay. All right. So Georgia makes number 21. And there are a few other states, actually. Florida has existing authority, but their legislature just had a bill that it's still waiting to be signed by the governor, but it will clarify that authority. And then Connecticut and Missouri are also waiting for governors to sign bills. So this is a really interesting, exciting new policy. There are a lot of flaws with it. Kinks are definitely still being worked out, but it's something that I think is really beneficial because it allows people that otherwise wouldn't be able to invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency to do so. So this is just kind of a timeline. This reiterates a lot of the things that I just said. And so with that, I think I'm about done. And I'll just mention kind of a few concluding remarks. I think a lot of people are kind of hard on the Southeast, and they see the Southeast as one of the slower movers in the renewable energy and energy efficiency field. But I think that what that really means is that there is a lot of potential going forward for there to be development, especially with the influx of federal funding. I think that there is a lot of opportunity to put some of that federal money into renewable energy and energy efficiency programs and really create jobs based on this and stimulate the markets. Of course, with that said, I think that there are a lot of things that you need to watch out for, and I didn't really get a chance to go into best practices in my talk, but I would encourage you to look at the Desire Solar Policy Guide if you're interested in kind of the nuances of some policies, and you'll be able to see in that solar policy guide what some of the best practices are. I think that one of the advantages of the Southeast not having a lot of renewable energy policies in place is that we can learn from the mistakes that other people have made and implement best practices, do it right the first time, and I think that the things to remember are that renewable portfolio standards with solar carve-outs are really important, solid net metering and interconnection are also really important, and just working with the utility and getting a good dialogue going there is another important thing. So with that, here's my contact information. And are we taking questions now or at the end? Okay, so thank you.
Sure. You got that? We will have the slides posted this evening.
And I will note that there are some seats up front if some of the people who are standing want to find a place to sit. So I'm Michael Shore. I'm the CEO of FLS Energy. I'm here with my partner Dale, who's in the back row there. And we're headquartered in Asheville, North Carolina, so just a hop, skip, and a jump away from you all in Atlanta. And I feel like North Carolina and Georgia are a little bit like sister states in our pursuit. I am the youngest in my family. I have an older sister. And there was a point when my sister had children, and I thought, well, and I had a wife at the time. I thought, well, that she's my future, and she's representing what I'm going to become. And then I had kids, and then my sister at that point had teenagers. And so again, she was my future, and she seemed to be surviving and happy, and life was working for her. And and now I have teenagers, and so I kind of feel for North Carolina, we've had great success with solar so far. FLS Energy has been a very successful company, and so we are your future. I think solar will come to Georgia in a great way. You have great resources here, and I hope what I can do in my presentation is give you a sense of that potential and also some ideas on how you all could create Georgia to be one of just a leading solar state. You certainly have a lot of things going for you in that direction. So this is a similar slide that you saw from Amy's presentation, so I'm just going to breeze by that. But this one I like. This is the North Carolina Utility Commission was looking at the energy resources in its state, and this data is from 2006. The coal capacity and the nuclear capacity, across the country, is being used up, and so the Utility Commission said, well, how are we going to continue to meet energy demand in our state, and what's the cost of the various resources going to be? And so you can see there in the middle a new pulverized coal plant the Utility Commission was estimating would be about 9 cents a kilowatt hour to develop, wind about the same price as new coal, nuclear a little bit more expensive, and then what caught my attention was this little piece of data that solar hot water identified by the North Carolina Utility Commission was found to be the most cost-effective way to generate energy. I was like, wow. The energy efficiency there is at the end, and we all know that energy efficiency investments are the best investments in terms of its return on meeting energy demand. But there, solar hot water was the most cost-effective generating technology, and this was very influential for Dal and I to start our business, FLS Energy, in 2006. And we said, wow, well, look at all these big users of solar hot water, hotels, military bases, colleges. Let's go after those. Maybe that's the best place to start solar in a big way. Even though we lots of times we think solar, we think about photovoltaics, but really maybe there's a bigger opportunity with solar hot water. So we founded our company. We are engineering and installation company. We chose to specialize in large commercial projects, and this is also for those of you who are thinking about policy issues. I started the company as an environmentalist, and I want solar on every house in America, but the way we thought about it is the way we're going to transform our economy is we're going to let business take the lead or help business take the lead, and then as we have all these incredible solar projects in businesses and institutions, then it becomes easier for the residential sector to take the step towards solar. So maybe that's lesson number one. The mission of our company is to make solar mainstream. We take that very seriously, and we think FLS Energy is going to play a really important role in making solar mainstream, especially solar hot water, which is our specialty. Most of you probably know the distinction between solar, hot water, and photovoltaics. Photovoltaics generate electricity, what we usually think about when we think about solar. The one on the right there is a solar farm that we developed in western North Carolina on Blue Ridge Paperland. And the solar PV panels, it's almost magical. You can have no moving parts, sunlight hits, the electrons get excited and they flow towards the positive layer, creating the current. Solar hot water is a much more intuitive technology. Each panel on the roof is like a little greenhouse. Water or glycol fluid is flowing through those panels. It gets hot on a day like this, 180, 200 degrees, and that water is pumped down to the mechanical room, and those BTUs are transferred into the domestic water system. So they're both great technologies, and certainly solar hot water is a technology that is really highly cost effective now. Solar PV, generally you have to get to a big scale before it makes business sense. Here are some of our solar PV projects. The one in the lower right-hand corner is a food line that we completed at the end of last year. That's the solar farm again that I mentioned. We were involved in developing the first large-scale solar farm at SAS Institute near Raleigh, North Carolina, which is in the upper right-hand corner. And this was a fun project out in Pamlico Sound. It's a water monitoring station, and it needs to have an energy source to take those water samples every minute. And so we did a small solar system and a small wind system there. And one of the fun things about solar is you can get for those of you who like weather forecasting, our data from our solar energy projects you can look back and see the weather that happened. It's kind of like turning your turn signal after you made the move into the other lane to let the person know what you just did. So this is, at the end of each week or every day we get a report on the generation at our solar farm, and so you can see the spikes in each day. Usually, it's a nice sunny day. You have a nice bell curve, and then obviously some of those other days in the week there was various clouds in the sky. Okay, but I want to spend a little bit more time talking about solar hot water because I think really this might be an opportunity for Georgia to make a significant foray into solar. And one of the nice things about it is you're not dependent on the utility. I mean, we work very closely with Progress Energy, Duke Energy. We're dependent on them, and we've had great working relationships. But it's great when we do solar hot water projects, and we don't even have to talk to the utility. We can just go ahead and do the project with the client. So solar hot water panel. There's lots of different kinds, but basically there's kind of a glass on top, and then copper piping and a copper absorber plate, and it's just like a little greenhouse, and the water going through those pipes gets awfully hot, and it's pumped down. The hot water kind of comes out the top of the panel. It's pumped down to a heat exchanger, and then the water from the domestic system and the solar loop interact, and all those BTUs are transferred into the domestic hot water loop. So it's a kind of a funny thing. I mean, the technology is pretty simple, and sometimes we say that it's been around since ancient times. The Greeks used solar hot water, but even solar panels that don't look that dissimilar to what we have today were being installed. This picture from 1910. Wow. So it's been around a long time, and here's a house today with that we installed just a couple of years ago with solar panels on it. In 2007, we installed our first very large-scale commercial solar hot water project. This is on the Proximity Hotel in Greensboro, North Carolina. There's 100 solar panels on it. We sized it for 99, and the owner said, well, let's make it 100. And the funny thing about that project is he called us up. He said, I'm developing this LEED Platinum certified hotel. I want you to put solar panels on it, but I don't want anybody to see the panels from the ground. So that's how we designed the project. And as we're going forward, he's getting all kinds of attention for this LEED Platinum hotel that he's building. And the New York Times comes out and does an article, and National Geographic sends a team out. And with all the green things that he's doing for his hotel, and he's doing some amazing things, all the reporters want to do is go on the roof and take a picture of the solar panels. And so the solar was really emblematic of his commitment to develop a green hotel. And he calls us up, he calls Dal up, and he says, well, I've changed my mind. I want people to see the solar panels when they approach the hotel. And so we redesigned it, and so that's what it looks like, and it is part of the whole branding of that hotel. And so that, at the time, was the largest solar hot water project in the country, and now we've surpassed it many times. This is another hotel, Biltmore Park Hilton, near Asheville, North Carolina, and we have just hotels are a great client for us. They use a lot of hot water. They're using it all year round. It's pretty predictable. They generally have enough roof space to develop a decent-sized system, and they're able to make a decision. Some institutions, like hospitals, we can't help us crack the bureaucracy of a hospital. I mean, the incredible amounts of hot water, but we can't seem to find the people to make a decision. But hotels are great, as is the ag community and military. Here's some of our other hotel projects in Greenville, South Carolina. We just turned that system. That's not on yet. It is on. We just turned that system on. The Hilton at the Knoxville Airport in Eastern Tennessee. Anyway, we've got lots of hotel projects going. This is Canoga Conference Center in Western North Carolina, and this project is notable for us because this is the first project that FLS Energy developed and owned. The first one that we owned. In fact, we borrowed the SunEdison model for developing solar PV projects, and we applied it to solar hot water. So we still own those panels, and we paid for the system. Canoga Conference Center paid us hardly anything up front, and we sell them hot water. We have a contract with them, and every month or every quarter, we're billing them for the hot water that they generate, and so we're like a little tiny utility on their roof. And so this is a great, it's just a great model to deploy solar, because every business that we talk to, they want solar, but few people are willing to, or few businesses are willing to bear the upfront costs. So we've taken that objection away, and we've taken that objection away, and are able to install tremendous amounts of solar hot water projects. And so let me explain this model that we're using. Our general relationship with a client, about half of the time we sell the systems, is we have the client comes to us, they purchase the system, and then there's all these incentives. There's the tax credits and the renewable energy credits, and the client finds a way to take advantage of those. And for some clients, that's pretty hard. Maybe it's a college and they don't have the tax liability or whatnot. And so even the incentives that are out there, they can't fully realize. So for the solar energy purchase agreements, or the PPAs, we have a relationship with the client, but instead of the client taking the incentives, FLS Energy takes all the incentives. We sell the renewable energy credits to the utility. We're able to realize the tax credits, and we sell the client the hot water that they're generating, and the client doesn't have to pay anything until we start delivering hot water to them, and we're able to sell them hot water at a rate less than what they would be paying for natural gas to heat the same amount of hot water. So it's just we're able to put almost a no-brainer, a no-lose proposition in front of clients, especially those that use lots and lots of hot water. And so the advantage is, well, one thing, they don't even see all that messy stuff that happens with these various incentive programs. They just see their contract with us to buy hot water at a certain rate. And so you can just imagine the advantages. One being that we're taking the risk. We have confidence in this technology. They don't know the technology, and if it doesn't deliver, they're just paying for the hot water that we're generating. So here's a pretty typical financial arrangement that we might have with a company, where say the yellow line right here is what they're paying for natural gas, and we're able to beat the price of natural gas by 10 to 20%, and then the tendency is the natural gas prices will increase over time, say by 3% or 5%, the yellow and blue lines respectively. Once we make the investment in the solar equipment, we have no fuel costs, and so we're able to fix the price that our clients pay us for the BTUs, and so the value proposition that we have becomes more significant over time. And then, just like with the solar PV, you have to monitor the solar hot water. It's not quite as simple as monitoring PV, but we do that. And so for the same proximity hotel that I showed you, you can go online and see what they're generating real time, any day or week of the year. Guilford College. This is the type of client that we like, because sometimes with solar you don't have that many return clients. We did a 12-panel system a few years ago, and they came back to us, and we just signed a contract to do a system that's 208 panels, which is huge, twice as large as the proximity hotel. And here was something that influenced them. The blue line represents their hot water, their BTU usage before they installed the solar energy system for 3 years, and then for the 2 years after they installed the solar energy system. So you can get a pretty clear sense that the solar consistently and dramatically reduced their energy bills. And they purchased that first 12-panel system. The additional 208-panel system, that's about $1 million project that we're doing, the FLS Energy's solar energy purchase agreement model, where we're developing the project and selling them the hot water like we're a small utility. Mars Hill College, this is a college north of our headquarters in Asheville. This is a 60-panel project, Dale, or 72 panel project, and so it's the cafeteria and then a few dormitories around the cafeteria, and it's just a great deal for Mars Hill College and a beautiful place to send our crews to go work. Knox County Prison, this is a 300 panel system, and this is, as far as we know so far, this is the largest solar hot water system to heat domestic hot water in the United States. And it's just a great project. The thing that prisons have over hotels is they have 100% occupancy rate. We don't have to work that into our calculations. And then this is if you're on the if you get the solar news, you probably got this news. It made national news last week. The governor of North Carolina visited our solar project at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We have a contract with Camp Lejeune to put solar essentially on all the new housing that's being developed there. So it's a remarkable thing to go down these neighborhoods and see solar on house after house. It's a dream, that those of us who've been kind of pushing renewable energy for a long time, that we've gotten to the point where you can go to a neighborhood and see this. So this is phase one. We're doing 900 houses this year, maybe a little bit into quarter one of next year, and then we're already talking about expanding that. And not just expanding that, but this is something replicable for other military bases all over. So we're certainly in discussion with this same type of opportunity for other military sectors. And this is I'm getting to the end. This is a kind of a very favorite slide of mine, because when we started this business, FLS Energy, about 5 years ago, there were no commercial scale solar energy projects. I mean, maybe SunEdison had a few things going on, but in the southeast there was no activity. And you can just see, here's a lot of our clients, and you can just see all of what's happened. We installed something at Wake Forest College this summer, Wake Forest University. I've always liked to pick one out. I think I mentioned the Food Line earlier. That's a great project. For that one and the solar farm and other projects, we're using Suniva panels, which is of course headquartered right here near Atlanta. That's high efficiency, good quality panels. They've been great to us, and we look forward to working with them a lot more on other solar PV projects. Then I should say, now this is the big sister kind of I don't know, advice. If would you resist advice from your big sister? That for us, I know you all have Georgia Power here that you have to work with. It wasn't long ago that Progress Energy and Duke Energy were, I don't think it's a stretch to say, impediments to getting solar going in North Carolina. And through good policy, through a negotiation process for a renewable portfolio standard in the state, both utility companies, I mean, they're fundamentally coal utility companies, but both of them have put in place, I would say, commendable solar energy programs and renewable energy programs, and they've both been very good to work with. They've both been open. We've signed a very large contract for Duke Energy to fulfill some of its renewable energy portfolio standard obligation through our solar hot water project. So they're in some ways a financial partner on all these solar thermal projects that we're doing. So all that to say is, that I imagine that those of you who are advocates for solar in Georgia and the folks at Georgia Power could figure out a way to come together, because you need each other. I mean, you can't do it without collaboration. And I think this is my last slide. I mentioned our mission is to make solar mainstream, and we were having a conversation in a staff meeting a few weeks ago, and I asked the question, what will the world look like when solar is mainstream? And one of our folks said, well, when solar shows up on the monopoly board, then we'll know it's mainstream. And I thought that was a pretty clever comment. So I went back to my computer. I went to the Parker Brothers website, and I was like, holy moly, the solar is here. So it's on the monopoly board. It's really only a matter of time before it's across Main Street across America. Okay, stuff on FLS Energy. That's Dennis, the developer of the Proximity Hotel. I guess that's our favorite testimonial. Okay, and that's it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I guess I don't have to explain power purchase agreements. It's now been explained for you. So indeed, SunEdison, we are sort of acknowledged as being the inventors of the power purchase agreement for in applying it to solar. It's already been discussed the fact that the biggest barrier to solar is the capital intensive cost. Indeed, when your fuel is free, well, it's all in the upfront capital. So I'm going to talk about three things today, which is that first to recognize that there are three different kinds of solar. And the residential solar, which we've touched on a little bit, and then the sort of commercial industrial solar is very different yet again than utility scale solar. Those three things, and you're wondering, gosh, PV is PV. But in actuality, there's three very different business models, and I think the intent of this when Ben and I were chatting was to sort of understand, what are some of the policies that we might want to think about in Georgia. And the first is to recognize that what's going to work for incenting residential solar is probably not going to work for incenting utility scale or commercial scale solar. So you need to think about those three. And then finally, we'll talk. I'll also then sort of wrap that up in some sort of drivers and impediments. SunEdison is a solar developer. We go out there and we find the solar projects and we develop them. And we finance them and we make them happen. So I'll talk a little bit about signals that we look for to be interested in a state and to then start sending our salespeople into that state and aggressively going after a state. And then I'll talk also about the Duke project. We have actually about 19 megawatts that we're doing in North Carolina right now. 17 of them are tied up in this one project with Duke in Davidson County. It's been an interesting experience. So three types of solar: residential, commercial industrial, and utility scale. Residential has historically been a cash purchase, and so cash or not, but basically it's been a purchase, and it has been the homeowner who goes and decides the fact that they want to buy this. You heard from Amy mention the PACE model that is just getting started, and power purchase agreements or leases are actually just getting started for the residential as well. But those are really just kind of emerging financing models, and historically have not been really what's been the norm. And so these are, you've got the homeowner putting out a lot of money. And so these have really been historically characterized by an upfront incentive in order to get people to be interested. So it is a percentage rebate or a $5,000 rebate or a $12,000 rebate, whatever the rebate is, it's usually some kind of right up front. This is really truly where your net metering policies really become very important. You have, of the sectors, you're going to have the highest installation costs in this sector of PV, but you're also offsetting the most expensive electricity. So obviously these people are paying, residential rates are much higher than commercial rates, for example. You probably all knew that. The challenges here, you would be surprised at homeowner associations. This is a huge challenge. Getting, being allowed to put PV on your roof. Your homeowner association is going to step in and say, no, sorry, that does not comply with our norms. And simply just the complexity of navigating all of this and figuring it out. Commercial industrial, this is the business model here that has become the norm, is the power purchase agreement. About 90% of commercial industrial is now being done via power purchase agreements. And this is the incentives that work for this sector of the market. It's not an upfront because it's just such a big number. I mean, that'd be kind of terrifying for a state to sort of hand out that amount of money. And so it's usually sort of a get it over time kind of incentive. So in California, it's called a PBI, a performance-based incentive. A lot on the East Coast of what is used is called these solar renewable energy credits, SRECs. As you generate solar power, you create these SRECs and you sell the SRECs, usually to utilities or other companies that generate electricity, and that's a big piece of your financing and making the financial picture work. You do get significant economies of scale of, this is your price point for installing this per watt is significantly less than a residential system, but you are offsetting much cheaper electricity. So instead of it being, if I'm talking about Maryland, where a residential rate is 13 cents a kilowatt hour, in a commercial rate could be, 10, 9, not to the sort of 9 to 8 to 10 cents range per kilowatt hour. What you do, one of the benefits here is distributed generation. I don't know, we haven't really talked much about distributed generation, but one of the why people like solar so much is there's no real problem with transmission. And so this whole transmission problem that we're all worried about with the wind resources in the Midwest, and how do we get them from the Midwest where there aren't a lot of people living in very windy areas to where people do live. All this cost of new transmission that everybody's trying to figure out how to wrap their arms around, that's really not an issue because you're basically just putting the solar where it's being used. And that also, when you think about, everybody criticizes solar for being so expensive compared to wind. But if you take wind and add it in the cost of all that new transmission, well, gee, surprise, surprise, it's not really much different than solar. So, you are still connected on the customer side of the meter. We typically do a lot of these as roof mounts. Our bread and butter are basically sort of the retail stores, big box stores, Walmart's, Kohl's, Staples, CVS, all these sort of things. They love to do this. And it's a perfect application. Low roof, it's pretty easy to get up there. Big flat roof, very relatively easy installation costs. Not a lot of shading. And the real challenges here become sort of, ensuring that you can finance it, that you've got the right net metering rules and policies in place. When you get to a utility scale, it really kind of becomes a little bit of a different beast. And so you're now talking about very large systems, and that's a photograph of our system out in Alamosa in Colorado. You can either have, state by state, whether it's a regulated or deregulated electricity state, the utility can either own it outright, or if they're allowed to own generation and have it in their rate base, or they can do it as a power purchase agreement. So it's two very common, purchase models based upon really the rules and structure of the state. So you're going to get huge economies of scale here, and you're going to be doing systems that are typically, no less than 10 megawatts. And you've got to recognize also that now you're starting to look for things such as, permitting and being able to use this large amount of land. You're looking for points that you can interconnect to the grid without requiring such upgrades or distribution or transmission upgrades. Have to think about incurring ground, costs for moving mountains or hills or things like that. So you're looking for nice flat plains that don't have a lot of trees on them, because the last thing you want to do is go around cutting down a bunch of trees in order to put up solar. That just really doesn't sound very green, does it? So I think we've already sort of seen some of this, which is sort of like, where is it happening? I think we know that California is king. New Jersey is doing a lot. And so actually, the reason for my showing this chart was to sort of get you ready for the next couple chart coming up, which is that to show that there's a surprising amount of solar happening in the Northeast. And you're kind of wondering to yourself, okay, now, not great resources in Massachusetts, Sun Resources in Massachusetts, really. Well, you know, what they do have there is they've got very expensive electricity rates, and they have also very high congestion charges. So whatever they can do to basically offload electricity congestion and put distributed generation right where it is, that's something that's really beneficial to the state and all ratepayers as a whole. The number of solar-friendly states on the rise, I think Amy already sort of covered this off, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. And I think this chart is to sort of compare compare sort of like, you know, why solar could make sense in the Southeast. And so we've talked a little bit about those insolation levels, so like the maps, the amount of solar that an area gets. And I know that when Richard Perez was in, he basically compared the Southeast to, you know, which is basically the gold standard of solar in the United States, which is the New Mexico, Arizona region. And it was about 20% less. So yeah, it's not the West. It's not the perfect dry West where you can do not only just regular sort of PV, but you can also do concentrating PV. That's something that you could not do in the Southeast. But you have very good solar resources. Certainly, obviously, much better than, you know, the Northeast, where solar is also happening. Where you do see, one of the reasons solar is happening so much in the Northeast is because of their electricity rates. They have much higher electricity rates than you have here. They also have very high congestion charges or peak charges. And so that's actually something to talk about, which we haven't really talked about much yet, is that solar is offsetting peak electricity. So people also talk about the cost of solar and, you know, gosh, how could we actually include it in our utility portfolio or something like that? Well, it is offsetting. You should not be equating it to that, you know, coal must run or nuclear must run plant. It is the gas peaker, really, is what you're comparing it to. And when you actually look at levelized cost of energy of a solar plant versus a gas peaker, solar actually comes out more cost effective than a gas peaker. So that's actually one of the reasons that the utilities are picking it up. And then looking at the peak load, I mean, wherever you've got, you know, those air conditioners humming on an August day, right in the middle of the day, wherever you've got that huge peak load, that is a perfect application for solar, because that's exactly when your solar is putting out the most. And you don't quite have exactly coincidental peaks, but it's you know, it's about a 2-hour shift, but it's pretty darn close. I think we've already talked about these 2 points here. There's such an emphasis on jobs these days that everybody keep on sort of getting the question from politicians, but how many jobs is that going to create? And are they manufacturing jobs? It's like, you know what? I do think that we have outsourced most of our manufacturing to China, but okay. There is some manufacturing happening still in the United States, but actually one of the nice things about solar is the fact that it's heavy on installation. So those installation jobs, you're not going to be outsourcing those to any other country, and those are the ones that by definition are going to stay local. They're right here, and these are electricians is generally the trade that this is going to, and so it makes it pretty attractive, the fact that these are, you know, typically trade union jobs. So declaring a state open for solar business, kind of what's required. A state incentive structure that encourages private financing. So North Carolina, we've been doing a lot of work within North Carolina, but actually North Carolina, I got to tell you, is a little hard. Their incentive structure is hard to work with. Their incentive structure is a tax credit for an in-state tax credit. So that means you've got to find a financing institution that has in-state tax liability. You guys all know what happened to our banks in 2008 and 2009. Trying to find a bank with in-state tax liability in 2009 was a pretty interesting exercise in frustration. So, you know, thinking about the right kind of incentive structure to put in place and being able to attract capital to that state is really much more effective than focusing on, like, how do we keep it all just local. So that's one thing I would suggest. Long-term contracts, I mean, basically the ability, our ability to do commercial projects is all hinged around our ability to get long-term contracts for the electricity and for the renewable energy credits. We generally only go into states where there is a renewable portfolio standard in place. I mean, that is what largely creates demand. Obviously, the exception to that is that RPS with a solar carve-out. The one exception to that is California, that has no solar carve-out, but they have the California Solar Roof Initiative. So, there you go. Net metering, interconnection, tax structures. I mentioned that these projects are so capital intensive. If you get a tax structure in place that is sort of can become wildly disproportionate, because this is just a capital, it's all it is. It's just capital. There's no fuel. There's no O&M. There's nothing else. And so it's all a function of those tax structures can become prohibitive and keep you from being able to do a project. Zoning and permitting, it can become huge too as well. Allowing third-party developers. We actually don't do any business in Florida. We're not allowed. We are barred from doing business in Florida. We are a third-party developer. We are not allowed to develop or sell electricity in Florida, which is a huge frustration, as you can imagine. So finally, wrapping up with a couple pretty photos of Duke here. This is a 17 megawatt project. What you're seeing there, a photo of on the left-hand side, is the phase 1, which is about 4 megawatts. This has been, a journey. I mean, we started, the RFP was issued in 2007. The contract was awarded in 2008. We broke ground in 2009, completed one of the phases in 2009, but will not be able to complete the rest until 2010. And you want to know why? One of the key reasons why is financing, that in-state tax credit. And the federal government did a wonderful thing with regards to creating the 1603 grant in lieu of tax credit. That's a big, long word. And when they did that, they created this really funny sort of unintended consequence that sort of, with the North Carolina tax code, that would have then taxed the tax with a federal tax grant, and it was like, well, you can't do that, So we had to then go legislatively undo that, and that put a lot of stuff on hold. But we are making good progress. The steps in going about getting Davidson County built. The first step was actually we had to go through was actually getting it rezoned. It was zoned. I think it was just pure agricultural. We had to get the land rezoned to agricultural and light industrial. That whole permitting process can take quite a long time. The engineering, obviously, we had to actually design this. The engineering of it, we designed it to actually be 31 blocks. We are building this thing in 31 exact, repeatable blocks. And so one of the things of keeping the cost down of this is that it is, a rinse, wash, and repeat. So not only are we building it out in 4 blocks, but those 4 major blocks are then further broken down. Those breaking up the financing, it's a pretty big, pretty expensive project. It's sort of hard to find one bank that has all the tax liability, so we had to go to a bunch of different banks, and that was one of the things that we had to do too as well. Construction and procurement. We actually right now in the midst of the earthwork for phases 2, 3, and 4 of moving, basically sort of flattening it out a little bit so we would get a better profile. And now, interestingly enough, of course, there's always one challenge after another. Now we're having a hard time getting modules. So you've heard about the fact that the Germany's feed-in tariff. Well, Germany's feed-in tariff is about to step down in July, and it's going to go from a higher rate to a lower rate. And so everybody got this great idea of whoa, let's build in Germany now while we can. And so it's basically diverting every single solar panel off to Germany right now. So we're having some interesting challenges there. When I would say, sort of some key lessons learned, it is, you have to be patient with these sort of projects. I wouldn't say that we are a fan of state tax incentives. That really has been one of the things that's contributed to this project taking as long as it did. Our partnership with Duke and the legislators and the commissioners has been absolutely critical with this. I mean, so often this is just something that's the first ever that's been done, and so we have to we bump into these laws all the time of well, you can't do that. Well, it's not the fact that I can't do that. It's just the fact that this law was written because nobody ever conceived of solar. So now we have to unwrite this law or unwrite this permitting. As I mentioned, the rinse, wash, and repeat approach has been, really key for us in maintaining the costs of the supply chain. We ensuring the fact that we've got supply. That's really been important. So the things that everybody always thinks would be an issue, right? The technology or labor, those have not been issues for us in any form, shape, or way. It's all been about the legislative, the laws, and the financing. And I think at this point in time, we're going to go to Q&A. So, Ben, you're moderating, right?
So, would our speakers would join us here. Dorothy, do you want to grab one microphone? So I think I imagine there are a few questions in the audience, and so Dorothy and I have the microphones, and we're glad to pass them around. And there.
Hi, my question's for Kerinia. With your PPA business in North Carolina, does state law allow you to sell power to non-utilities?
Yes.
No, North Carolina law says only utilities can sell electricity. So I think it's the same in Georgia. Right.
Well, I have a follow-up question on that then. So that has been Walter Brown, by the way, Chairman, Georgia Solar Energy Association. Thank you so much. Very, very good presentations. The Territorial Act in Georgia is currently being used as an impediment to PPA contracting in Georgia. Do you have any sense, maybe you don't know how our act works, whether the objections raised by the Territorial Act, which if there are territorial acts in other states, that aren't providing that impediment, are we getting it wrong in Georgia? Are we misinterpreting the Territorial Act to prevent PPA contracting? Follow up on Tom's question. Whoever has an opinion.
Unfortunately, I do not know anything about the Territorial Act. So, I guess I can only comment on other states that are barring PPAs, and that is happening in a number of areas. Florida and Arizona are barring power purchase agreements. So it's an exception, but it's not, that's not been heard of before. I think it really comes down to the legislative will to overturn that and allow other entrants into the marketplace in order to be able to achieve the goals of the state and its focus on renewables.
I would say that you almost have to take a stepwise approach and plan out how, what is the order of the policies that need to be implemented to really get solar in place. And so in North Carolina, we can't do a solar PV project and sell electricity to any commercial entity. Only the utilities can do that. But that is not standing in the way of us being a very successful solar company in the state. And there's a lot of activity in North Carolina, despite some of the challenges that Kerinia raised. So I would say that, and for us to take on the utilities and the inertia on that issue, it's just not ripe in North Carolina, even with all that's going on. So I would suggest, not knowing the state like you do, but I might suggest that you really focus on grant programs, tax credit programs, which I do like, and a renewable portfolio standard, and leave that toughest nut for when you get these others in place and you really prove that solar can be successful here.
I'll actually just comment on the Territorial Act briefly. We, at Desire, we recently did a research project on third-party PPAs, and the Territorial Act came up in Georgia. And so we had some legal folks look at that, and if your question was if you're misinterpreting it, I don't think that you're misinterpreting it. So unfortunately, it seems like third-party PPAs can't occur in Georgia currently, and that's kind of the same situation in North Carolina where you can do it, but if you do it, you'll be regulated as a utility, and I don't think companies are generally willing to do that.
Some financing questions. First one. Which bank seems to understand financing solar projects of any kind? Second, have you used new market tax credits? Third, have you used recovery zone facility bonds?
We have a portfolio of banks that we work with. Each bank basically sort of has different preferences. There are some that are comfortable with, more comfortable with retail customers, because it largely comes down to also having to take into consideration the credit worthiness of the host that you are, in a power purchase agreement. I think that what we've learned out of 2008 and 2009 is ensure the fact that you've got lots of different partners, because they'll also have a sector that they're more comfortable with. We recently announced a new fund, basically an infrastructure fund. We're starting to actually get more into infrastructure financing. So we've got a $1.5 billion infrastructure fund that we've just opened up that we're looking to fill for projects, which is pretty exciting. It usually takes us a solid 6 months to a year to work with a bank to educate them on all the technologies and different issues. It's a bit of a brain drain activity, both for the bank and for us, to bring a new bank online. And there obviously has to be an interest and willingness on their part to go through that process. And then there was a second part of the question, which I don't quite remember. Oh, are we reusing recovery zone bonds, et cetera? Yes, we are in certain states where we are basically where we have stronger, more established markets. So for California, we're using recovery zone bonds very effectively. I don't know whether we're using those. Sorry, I can't answer that one.
On the utility scale, you talked about solar PV. Do you know if there are any studies about concentrating solar power in the southeast, or is it just considered to be too expensive?
Generally, it won't work. I mean, it's you need a certain amount of clarity of air, for lack of a better word. You can't sort of have too much water density, and so basically concentrating PV is one of those technologies that really is concentrated, for lack of a better word, to the southwest. You can use trackers around here.
I have a question for Amy. You do research on all sorts of different renewables. Can you give a little background and discuss the solar carve-outs and why certain states have certain percentages and how they arrived at those percentages?
So I can't really give a lot of background on how they arrived at the percentages. It's I think it's a legislative analysis, and they analyze what the resources are in the state and what they actually would be able to meet. And I'm not really heavily involved in the legislative process, but in terms of solar carve-outs, a lot of states have either solar carve-outs or distributed generation carve-outs, and so you either have to, actually North Carolina has some interesting carve-outs. We have a swine waste carve-out as well, and I think it might be swine waste and poultry waste. So carve-outs are just kind of based on what the local resources are. Texas has a non-wind carve-out because Texas has a lot of wind development, and so their carve-out is targeted at non-wind, so a lot of that will end up being solar. So states just basically have these carve-outs to encourage specific types of renewables or specific types of generation that probably wouldn't happen in as great of an amount otherwise.
I can comment on that. I was quite involved in developing the North Carolina Renewable Portfolio Standard, which has that carve-out. And basically the answer is, as much as the environmental and renewable energy community can get, as much as they can convince the utilities to allow in the bill. And so in North Carolina, that was 0.2%, and we started with a much higher goal. The nice thing is now that there's enough states with these solar carve-outs that Amy presented, and there's a range, and you could almost, go to the legislature and say, here's the range. Anywhere in this range would be a boon to the solar energy industry in Georgia. Let's create the solar carve-out.
I hate to ask a technical question on the campus here, but is anyone doing combined electricity and heat that would seem to fit into the commercial market pretty well, and the solar can only take about 20% of the energy?
So just as a
I mean, you could have a panel with the solar in the back and glass in the front, is what I'm saying.
right, there's a little bit of that research going on that when you have solar, it functions better at cooler temperatures. So you need a heat sink to dissipate some of that energy. And there's some technologies where you flow water kind of through this heat sink, and then you have this heated water as a ancillary energy. So that's emerging. I mean, to me, that sounds like a brilliant concept, and we'll see if it takes hold. But I will say, that there's solar hot water is a real cost-effective technology. People don't tend to pay as much attention to it. And yet there's a great opportunity there you can use solar to run chillers in the winter and then heat the space in the summer. And I think that's a technology that will help shape how we get energy from in the decades to come.
Thank you.
The legislative will in Georgia to do an RPS, I think, is going to take a lot of energy, but we are going through an integrated resource planning process right now. Are there any suggestions on how we may be able to leverage that to get to, Michael, what you said is on that?
Yeah, so the process, which I was involved with for 10 years in North Carolina, so persevere, is it started in 2002 when North Carolina passed a Clean Smokestacks Act to reduce pollution from the coal-fired power plants, and the environmental community and the utilities negotiated this hand in hand, and it was a miracle. Heaven opened up, and the utilities and the environmentalists going to the legislature together saying we agree on this bill. It was an utter miracle. And then and those same relationships were the relationships that enabled a discussion about a renewable portfolio standard, and so it would not have happened had Duke Energy and Progress Energy not been willing to sit down at the table and say, yes, this is worthy of our time to discuss. And we were saying to them, look, this is going to come down at the federal level in some way. You're better off to be in negotiation now before you're caught by the federal government. And I remember the day where the utilities bought that, where they finally said, okay, we're ready to negotiate. And then it was a hard negotiation. It was a comprehensive energy bill that had lots of things that the environmental community didn't like about financing of conventional plants and nuclear, and it was a totally comprehensive bill, and we had to be in that negotiation. And if we were purists, we wouldn't have been able to bring the utilities along, and we wouldn't have this incredible solar activity going on and renewable activity in general going on in North Carolina. So work with the utilities, negotiate, and be willing to be flexible.
If I could, a question from the web, or from our webcast participant. Any insights into trends in net metering from a commercial industrial perspective?
So I think one of the trends in net metering is that we're seeing what we call supersized net metering. So I think that there are over 20 states that allow systems that are over 1 megawatt to be net metered. So I think that's kind of one of the emerging trends. And then on the interconnection side, we're seeing there be kind of different tiers. So you'll have interconnection rules for net metered systems and interconnection rules for non-net metered systems, and it'll be broken up by either sector, so residential, commercial, or it'll be broken up by capacity, and then you'll have different interconnection fees related to those capacities.
Thanks.
My question comes from more of a building energy assessment approach. I just want to know more about which one is better, using the PVs or the solar hot water. If you were to install solar thermal, are we too close?
Which one's better, using solar electric or solar hot water? I mean, of course, use them both. If a company has a limited amount of money to spend, just kind of thinking about budget, that For solar, hot water, you get about 3 times as much energy per dollar of investment that you put in. So that's the biggest bang for your buck for college campuses and military bases and hospitals and hotels and residential. And if you want solar and you're not one of those, if you're a manufacturing facility or Target or all of the big box stores that you work with, then solar hot water can just play a little tiny fraction, and PV is the obvious choice.
It really depends upon your energy profile and use. I mean, if you use a lot of hot water, then obviously it makes great sense, as was mentioned, hospitals, hotels, laundries even. But what sort of went unsaid was that a Target doesn't use a ton of hot water, but they use a lot of electricity, a lot of lights, a lot of air conditioning, things like that.
How do you guys decide what equipment you use in your projects as far as the panels, the inverters, so on and so forth? And then second, has there been any progress on storing solar energy?
We are technology agnostic. We use monocrystalline, polycrystalline, thin film, whatever is appropriate for the application. We obviously very competitive, look for competitive pricing of the modules. Recently there has been a number of projects that are funded by the American Recovery Reinvestment Act, which had have a Buy American clause in there. So we're thrilled actually that there are a number of American manufacturers of panels. So really we do the engineering, have certain preferred suppliers that we go to because we've done a lot of research on them, know that they're repeatable, know that their panels perform repeatably within certain specs. We have a test site up on our roof where we test all these things ourselves. And then I think there was a second part of your question, which was energy storage. I know that that's the holy grail. Everybody keeps on looking for cheap energy storage. The joke is apparently out that if you're out in Silicon Valley, there's just simply investors running after you trying. You used to have a cheap energy storage solution. Investors are running after you trying to throw money at you. But no, I have not heard of any good, viable, cheap energy storage solutions. So I know you guys have an incubator right here. Hey, maybe there's a program for Georgia Tech.
So this is a question I feel strongly about. We want to use the best technologies out there, the most durable, the most efficient, and my partner Dale, he feels pretty strongly about it also being American-made when it meets the best criteria. So for the solar hot water, we use solar hot water panels manufactured out of Jacksonville, Florida. The company is called AET, and they have performed great for us over the years. We've done thousands of those panels. And then for solar PV, this is almost getting back to the legislative issue, how to make the case here. So, for goodness sake, you guys have SunEdison, right here in Georgia, one of the few solar PV manufacturers in the United States. We started about the same time, Georgia and FLS Energy. We have this incredible success story of growing from 3 employees to 50 employees today. SunEdison, I don't know what it is. I think it's, they started with, a couple of employees and they have 200. And so it's just a great job, creation, local story. I think, I imagine you all are doing this, but I think, sharing their story with the legislature and the job creation and the manufacturing jobs, the heart of America, I think that can go a long way. So anyway, the technology, we really like SunEdison panels for the solar PV projects.
Hi. You described in general about the financing of these projects that your customers are deploying. Can you get into more detail about the ROI analysis that they do and what they're looking for in order to go and deploy these systems?
So I'll just go briefly for our solar hot water clients. We're doing the project at Camp Lejeune and hotels and all over. The ROI, there's an immediate payback for them because we're installing the system at no cost to them, and then we're selling them hot water at less than what they pay for natural gas. For solar PV projects, we are not selling. Yeah. So for us, we have to have a 10-year contract with the client to be good, to have gotten our payback at year 4 or 5, and then have the 5 or 6 years of profit that comes after that. That's for the solar hot water projects.
That's assuming a 20% margin, it sounded like, based on your comment.
Yeah, about a 10 to 20% less than, say, natural gas. For solar PV, we need to, for our PPA solar PV projects, we have 15 to 20 year contracts.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. We have time for one more question. I think this gentleman here has one.
We've been having a number of problems in Georgia with folks who offer wonderful feed-in tariffs, but they also, the way the deals have to be structured to qualify is the electrons have to go through the meter of the customer, and the customer has to own the electrons momentarily. And what the provider of the wonderful subsidy wants is the broadest indemnity clause known to man for anything that happens downstream. So you have a customer, you have a developer deal, customer has no control, no ownership, no nothing, but has to momentarily own the electrons so they can be passed on to the party providing the subsidy, if you will. Have you run into that, and have you dealt with it?
That's a new one. No, I can't say that we've run into that
well,
one
good
before.
for you that you've not run into it.
It's not uncommon, the fact that there are different insurance requirements for various levels of interconnection. We do business in a bunch of different states, so it's quite possible that we are dealing with that in some state, and I'm simply not aware of it. But I have not heard of it on any of the eastern states that I have a tendency to focus on.
No, I can't comment except to say that's all the more reason for you all in Georgia to create demand through a renewable portfolio standard. And you can even make the argument that there's going to be all kinds of crazy schemes that happen in the state until there's more of a kind of a free market of solar activity and competition. So maybe that can go into the pot of arguments for proactive legislation here.
Any other comments? Before we adjourn, 3 quick announcements. One is just remember the next Clean Energy Speaker Series will be held at the end of August. 2, the slides will be uploaded on the website, secleanenergy.org. They should be up by the end of the day, and the webcast will be archived and should be available within 24 hours. And 3, let us thank our distinguished speakers for their great presentations and the Q&A.